Hello, everybody. Welcome to Silent Podcast, where we are anything but silent. My name is Josh, and this is the inaugural episode of Fantasy Shmantasy, where we're going to be breaking down the first season of Amazon Prime's Lord of the Rings: The Rings of Power. With me to turn this podcast journey into a podcast adventure is Bryan, friend of the stars, Teresi. Thanks for being here, Bryan. I'm excited to jump in and dive into, not too greedily, hopefully everything Middle Earth here. So how you doing tonight?
Oh, I'm doing great, Josh. I've been waiting for this since the breaking of the first silence. So
Great. Well, we're gonna jump in and just touch on some of our thoughts on this first season here of Amazon Prime's The Rings of Power. Spoiler alert: Bryan and I both loved it. So I know there's a lot of people here who did not enjoy this show, and for various reasons. When I typed in earlier today, Googling The Rings of Power, the first three words that came up was The Rings of Power boring, The Rings of Power woke, The Rings of Power bad. So I think that gives you a picture of just some of the discourse that's out there, Bryan. I know you're not as tapped in online, but yeah, that's some of the criticisms being levied, and that's not coming from us. So just to be very clear, we loved it, and I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but that is how I feel, and spoiler, I think that's how my friend here feels as well. So we are live streaming, so we may get some comments in here as we're chatting. We will also be publishing this in your feeds. So if you're listening and you want to join along and see us, our beautiful elven faces, or maybe Numenorian faces at the very least, you can jump in on the YouTube channel at Silent Podcast as well. But Bryan, let's just start. Let's just go zoom out real big here. To begin things, just got to ask you, what do you love about this Middle Earth Lord of the Rings world that Tolkien has created, whether it's the movies, whether it's the show, the books? Yeah, what is it about this franchise, this fantasy world that draws you in, enough to want to come and talk about it here in front of people?
Right. So I've been thinking about this a lot more recently, and I, of course, grew up watching the movies, and I mean, it's one of the greatest trilogies of all time. I think the movies are among, they're all three are in like my top 10 to 15 movies ever for me, and the third one I think is the crowning achievement. But I think on one sense, I love the kind of the setting and the world, and the world building by Tolkien is incredible, and I think that's what's drawn so many people to Lord of the Rings. It's really kind of the foundation of Western fantasy worlds, but beyond that, I think it's really beautiful. The themes it touches about, it's about friendship and light and hope in the midst of darkness, and the battle every kind of person has with the darkness in their own hearts, and kind of the not everyone. Some people fall to it. Some people overcome it. Some people fall and then overcome. There's tragedy and triumph, and most of the characters may not have like the kind of crazy Game of Thrones-esque kind of complexity to them, but there's still this deep beauty, and more than anything, I think it kind of calls you to the good. It's deeply inspiring to me, and I rarely rewatch movies or anything like that, but the Lord of the Rings trilogy, I watched that so many times growing up, and I think it's because I find it so inspiring and beautiful, and I just feel like I am called to be a better person when I watch all these people struggle with the good and evil in their own heart.
Yeah, Yeah, I love that. And I think that last point is like, for me, what stands out when we talk about the original trilogy here, stands out for me as what Lord of the Rings offers that nothing else does, or at least to the caliber and quality that it provides, as far as just something that really calls out to me to want to be like the best version of myself. I feel like, again, like there's we're in the era of, golden TV, as they say, where the anti-hero is king, and all these TV shows, which I love very much. Breaking Bad, The Sopranos, The Wire, like all those are upper echelon. I mean, Break or Better Call Saul, just wrapped up as another prequel series, and that was like, incredible. But what I feel like I always go back to, and why like we rewatch The Lord of the Rings over and over again, is because like it's not comfort food either. So it's not the darkness, and like, it's not it's not just, complex, interesting characters doing bad stuff. It's also not, on the other hand, like popcorn, movies or TV shows that just like, make me zone out and not think about, something for an hour, which, that there's place for those TV shows as well, and movies and stuff. But for me, Lord of the Rings is this like extra other category of something that really inspires me, gives me hope for, humanity, for the good in people. And while not everybody, as we're gonna talk about here, like chooses the good, it does have a very strong underlying philosophy, almost theology, of that there's good and there's bad in every person. And so in some ways that gives me just a lot of like hope about the world, that people can choose good, that there's even potentially good in Sauron, as we'll talk about. Which is interesting, which is just well, we're gonna get to this show, and the end of takes it has on some of these old characters that we know from the original trilogy. But I love the quote from Galadriel, which is she says in this last episode, I believe it's either the 7th or 8th episode, but every war is fought both without and within. Of that, every soldier must be mindful. She's saying that to Theo. And I think that encapsulates for me kind of just, I think, the heart of how Tolkien views humanity. So, like I said, big fan of the show. Now, was it perfect? Of course not. I thought the first few episodes were a little slow, to be honest, and then it picked up pace. And then by the end, though, I mean, I'll be completely honest, I was in tears with some of those scenes in the last episode. Oh man, the Nori and Poppy stuff was getting to me. A few times the Harfoots, brought a tear to my eye. I love the Elrond and Durin stuff. That's some of the highlights for me. But I think when it wrapped up this last episode, Bryan, did you feel like it was like a cohesive first season of a show? How did you like, what was like the feeling you were left with at the end of the season?
Right. So the ultimate feeling I had was that it got the most important thing right to me, which is that it captured what Lord of the Rings is to me, that Tolkien feel, that Tolkien world. And I could bring up certain things about the slowness of the beginning, or I thought the score was not nearly on par with anything of the trilogy. But overall, like I think they nailed the most important thing, and so I was left really moved by a lot of these different characters and their struggles, and how they added so much depth to a lot of our kind of OG kind of favorites, from Galadriel to Elrond, and even added there's a surprising complexity to people like Sauron, to people like just Adar and it was interesting. It wasn't so the clearness of good and evil was actually it was engaged with on a deeper level than I thought it would, really. So
I think for me that's a good place to jump in here. Is I thought that conversation between Galadriel and Adar about the orcs, or I should say the Uruks, want to call them by how they want to be called. But yeah, just about like the conundrum of, how do you treat these race of beings? And you already see the elves being, they're just generally, like, by default pretty racist and elitist, towards other races, like, and then, I mean, it's not just them. The dwarves are okay with the elves fading and leaving Middle Earth as well, so they're, I mean, at least King Durin is. But I thought that was something that just kind of, when you watch the original movies, it's just kind of something you don't think about while you're watching them, because you're caught up in the good versus evil. But just to have kind of these faceless evil monsters, to explore kind of what place is there in this universe for them to exist. Again, another quote that I wrote down here was from Adar. And he says, "We are creations of the One, master of the secret fire, the same as you, as worthy of the breath of life, and just as worthy of a home." And it reminds me of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which my wife and I are watching for the first time, going through. In Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the distinction is humans have souls and vampires don't. And so therefore she can slay vampires all day, because there's no potential for redemption whatsoever. Now, they kind of nuance that a little bit, but that's generally like why you can just always feel comfortable with them killing off a vampire at any moment, is because there's just literally, like, canonically zero chance that they can be redeemed, and they have no place in the world because they're just true evil. Now, that's kind of how I always thought of the orcs / Uruks, until this conversation. And it kind of made me wonder of, like, okay, do these things have souls, or the Tolkienian equivalent of souls? And I really just, it made me step back and think and evaluate more about how, again, even the original trilogy, and filling in some of my emotions and thoughts about that. Were you on a similar, did that conversation elicit some of the similar thoughts or feelings for you, Bryan?
Yes. Yeah. I also, not only that conversation, but what Adar said when he was in his kind of rousing speech to his fellow Uruks, just when he was talking about them as family and as brothers, and as just talking about their desire for a home. It added an unexpected complexity and made me wonder, are they capable of redemption, or are they too far gone? It's, I don't know. It's an interesting conversation, and I'm interested to see where the series kind of takes that from here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We don't know exactly what Adar's deal is. We get a sense that maybe he's not fully evil himself, right? Like, I mean, this motivation, at least if it's true, is really understandable, to create a land for these people to live in, and to have, their own carved out place in Middle Earth. Makes a lot of sense. And he says he even killed Sauron, so, or at least he thinks he does, and he thinks he did. And so, like, maybe Adar looks evil, talks evil, smells evil, but isn't actually, like, truly evil. And I don't know. I'm really interested to see where things go there. But I think, yeah, overall, again, what Lord of the Rings does is everything is existential. Everything is esoteric. Everything is not just like one. It's not just on the surface. And that's also just in general what I thought the show did super well. Is it felt like what Lord of the Rings also feels like to me is not like the writing doesn't feel like it's like a novel. It feels like it's more of a epic poem, in the sense that, like, every line that's, like, uttered and shared, every conversation feels like it's dripping with, like, these, like, amazing metaphors, and, like, they're articulating things, in kind of, again, this esoteric sense of, especially when it comes, like, to the elves and stuff. Like, it feels like the layers and depth to each conversation and each phrase, the way things are phrased, just it grips me. And I feel like, again, it feels like very Miltonian as far as Paradise Lost goes, which I listened to a few interviews with JD and Patrick, the showrunners for the show, and Paradise Lost was a huge influence for how they were approaching things, especially when it comes to Halbrand / Sauron as this kind of understandable anti-hero that they want you to be familiar with before they kind of reveal how, who he really is and how bad he is. But I love that this show really captured that from the original trilogy. Like, there are just so many different ways of articulating things that could have seemed, I don't know, it just seemed hollow or something, but I really felt like it was they did well to make it feel like this grand scope of everything is happening, and yet it's also very personal, and yet it's very poetic, and yet it's also about the relationships, and like balancing all those different things just is a tough balancing act to perform. But I thought they walked the high wire pretty well.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like, just certain hope is never mere, even when it is meager. Just, I don't know. It's just beautiful things like that without being somehow in the Lord of the Rings world. These kinds of things we find. I found this true of the trilogy as well as just the show. It's just somehow these things we might find kind of cheesy or too idealistic. Like, I don't know, something about it, like it manages to actually pull it off in a really beautiful way that I think few other stories and worlds do.
Yeah. Well, let's jump in more specifically. I think, we've been been on this kind of esoteric plane. Let's bring it down a little bit here. And I want to start off by just asking about your impression of Galadriel, because she's obviously the main character here. And she's somebody who we're pretty familiar with in the original movie. She's by far, not the main character, but she's also the one who opens up the entire trilogy with hold on, I'm getting some feedback here.
Oh, sorry, we were just talking about Galadriel. Sorry, you just said you were getting okay. So one of the like Galadriel for me was it's really interesting because in the movies she is kind of a terrifying figure in a lot of ways. She's very uh just like she almost felt inaccessible and unhuman in some ways. And like the way she talks with Frodo, and then she has this crazy scene where she's you know has this vision of herself as a queen in place of the Dark Lord when there's this scene with the ring. And so I really loved kind of seeing a more human side to her. I mean, as an elf, but just kind of seeing her in her early days, kind of really the darkness just touching upon her, weighing upon her, of having lost. And it's really, it makes sense, it's rooted in her brother's loss, and she feels like she can't let it go. And kind of just going, even the very scene, like just how far away they are from everything else, just going north with less and less people. There's like 10 elves with her, and it's just how far away she's like isolating herself. I loved how that's how it began. I thought it was pretty interesting. But
yeah, I loved that last scene, not last scene, but in the last episode where they melted down the knife. I thought that was such a beautiful picture of sacrifice. They built up this dagger as being related to all the emotions and trauma with her brother Finrod's death, and for her to, use that to forge the three rings. I just thought was a really good, that was one of the most emotionally satisfying moments for me of the entire season. Just because we had been on this journey with her, and it felt like this first season was really her arc of letting go of just that trauma and trying to be able to move forward and fulfill the same destiny, to fight evil and to defeat Sauron, but to not do it in a way that's clinging to I have to do it to fulfill my brother's promises, and then to be motivated by this again, just sinking horrible trauma versus just she's now free to do it her way and to not be so feel afraid of letting him down. And so ironically, I think Halbrand / Sauron, was trying to traumatize her further to get her on his side. But I did think it actually led to a series of events that created an emotional catharsis for her.
Yeah. And that's so it's just interesting because in the that I find that happens a lot in the Lord of the Rings kind of world, where you have these things where say Sauron is trying to re-traumatize her, or these encounters with darkness, but they actually lead to kind of, it's almost a lot of times through them that redemption or real growth happens. And I found that scene really touching and beautiful as well. She's finally giving this up. Yeah. So I don't know. I really loved, I thought Galadriel was an excellent character all the way through.
Yeah, I loved her. I loved her ferocity. Also, the actress, the way that she just played her, is a little bit different, right, than the Galadriel we had in the the original trilogy. But I felt like she has this fire in her that I feel is very fun to watch on screen. But let's move on. I feel like people are kind of probably already pissed at us that we're this far into this show and we're not really touching on this whole Sauron Halbrand thing. So first of all, were you surprised by this reveal? Was this something you were thinking was a possibility? Yeah. What was your reaction when we found out that Halbrand was really secret Sauron all along?
Okay, so as someone who doesn't, I tend to not try to speculate too much on who characters will be and that kind of thing, unless it's really, they're really making it kind of obvious. But I felt honestly very hurt. I felt kind of betrayed.
Okay, I love this. I love this.
I felt like I trusted Halbrand. I had gotten to that point, and there were red flags. There were very concerning things he said at individual points throughout, but there were also moments that felt at least so genuine to me, of growth. And he maybe it was part of it was him looking looking a little Aragorn-esque, being a little bit of a reluctant king kind of figure. And so that probably played into it. But I don't, just the way he saved Galadriel, the way, I don't know, it seemed and maybe some of that was he really did see something in her that he really valued, and maybe those moments were genuine. But still, I don't know, it was just is he either, there were some scenes I was thinking either, because I went back and rewatched all these scenes with Halbrand, and I'm thinking, because I was looking, okay, was he just a con man this whole way through? Was he just faking all of this in a lot of ways, just trying to deceive Galadriel, get her on his side, all this stuff from the very moment? And but they're showing scenes of him sometimes being where he's alone, even, and he's seems deeply in thought about whether he should take up the little king's what is it, insignia, sigil, the little marking.
I know what you mean, the symbol of his Southland kingship.
Right. And it's just I just those moments made me feel like there was something genuine to a lot of those times, and maybe he had a, you know, a grand master plan, but I don't know. This is a big discussion for me because I'm very I could see both being consistent with the Sauron figure.
Yeah. Well, here's what I think. I think that that is exactly the question that they want us to be left with, because that's the kind of feeling that I think Galadriel's left with. And if we're supposed to view him, you know, we have all kind of the same information that she has, which is, you know, like this, like, I don't know, like it seems like he wanted to be good. Like when he's saying, like, you know, I didn't think it was possible that I could be redeemed. You know, I told you I did all this bad stuff, but when I'm with you, I feel like I don't have to be that way. Like I really don't know if that is genuine. And Sauron is going to turn out to be this character that is like just actually sadly like just, you know, this was his fate or destiny, or his more, I guess, more internally like his nature was to be evil in this way, and he can't help himself even if he doesn't want to. Or is it just, you know, he is just this master manipulator puppeteer, which he clearly is also. Like, I mean, he was clearly, the whole rings thing, everything just seemed, you know, clearly like he was playing the game there. But I feel like they don't want to answer that question, at least not yet, about what his true nature is, and leave us with a little bit of mystery there. Because again, I think that's where Galadriel's left, in this place of like, what just happened? Like, how did I just let this happen? Was he real? Was he not? Like, there's a genuine connection between them two, and I think she's still trying to understand what exactly their relationship and nature is.
Right. Okay. And there's one. Let me ask you a question. Let me ask you this. There's one moment in particular. Why, if he's really, if all along he's this master manipulator and all this, why does it seem like he's so genuinely content with staying on Numenor as like a blacksmith's aide? Like,
yeah, I don't know. I wonder if that was a little bit of manipulation. I don't know. That's a really good, that's a really, really good question. I feel like that is one of those decision points that like is tough to understand at this point. I don't get it, because I could very well see it being this kind of like reverse psychology situation. Like the more that he like expresses that he doesn't really want that, the more that Galadriel is like, I need him to be that, you know? And then like, so it's kind of like he knows that she'll lean in more the more that he leans back. And that very well could be the case. Or it could just be simple that, yeah, like he just is like, I don't want to be the bad guy. You know, I don't want to do that anymore. I just want to be in Numenor around these Numenorians, and, you know, just kind of live hundreds of years alongside them, and maybe make some non-ring jewelry. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I could see it still being a little bit of reverse psychology as well. I do see that. It's just there's shots of him alone deliberating. I was like, is he method acting at that point? Like, what is that?
Okay, that's actually so the interview, I forget the actor's last name, but the actor's name is Charlie. And he did say that he thinks Sauron is the ultimate method actor.
Wow.
So that was part of what he said. So, and I think the actor, though, from his perspective, is kind of doing this thing where he doesn't want all the fandom to all of a sudden be like fawning over him. He's kind of, I think so, as the actor, he's kind of trying to say like, hey, Sauron's the bad guy. Let's not forget this. I know, like, you know, there's all these hashtags like Haladriel and like trying to ship them together, and like, you know, whatever, pages and pages of fan fictions, you know, that are being written about, you know, how hot Halbrand is, and, you know, his quest for love in Numenor when he stayed instead of left or something. I don't know. But like, so I think that's part of his reaction in saying that, but he did explicitly say that he views Sauron as the ultimate method actor, the Daniel Day-Lewis of Middle Earth. So I don't know. There's something there. The other thing you brought up too, of like him looking like Aragorn, JD and Patrick did say very explicitly that we wanted to put a Sauron in an Aragorn suit out there, like, so that you would kind of archetypally see him as a certain way, and then, you know, of course, subvert it. So I don't know. This was really good. I think I was I was listening to podcasts. There's a great series from the Ringerverse. If anybody's looking for more content, look up House of R, the Ringerverse. They do a great job going into more of the lore. They were picking up on some stuff that Halbrand was Sauron before, before I was. So they were saying things like, he used the word bind a few times, like I want to bind this experience to me, when he's talking to Galadriel, and just like that kind of possessiveness, like kind of being in his nature. So there was some flags there. I mean, there's a lot of theories online, of course, about the stranger being potentially Sauron, or maybe even Theo being Sauron. So there's different options of like, if Sauron was among us at this point, it could be a few people. But I think Halbrand was the contender for most of the hardcore nerds out there, my people, who were really, like with a fine-tuned comb, just going through everything.
Yeah. Okay, but with the bind thing, just a I mean, Galadriel on the raft said, "Bind yourself to me," I believe. So she uses that. I mean, I don't know. That's
true.
A little too far for me. But I mean, the prison cell moment, I think, when he talks about finding out about what your opponent kind of fears and helping them master that, so you can master them. That was very concerning. But I just blew right past that red flag and just moved on to other moments, I guess.
Yeah. Well, okay. Well, I think, again, there's a lot to get to. So let's touch on, I know we're gonna come back to Halbrand and Sauron in certain ways, but let's just go through some of these other characters who we've seen. So I think the other big one that we saw a lot of in the original trilogy was Elrond. Now we see Elrond here. He's younger. He's more explicitly discussed at, talking about his half-elf identity, which wasn't really brought up in the movies as far as I remember. I know it's obviously in the books and stuff, but I really like this young, ambitious Elrond. Clearly, somebody who is ambitious. So he's not the reluctant king type of person. You see him, he's trying to, find a way for himself in this elf world as a half elf, and seems to be really good at his job and competent. And he's able to be a great ambassador to the dwarves, and has built a very, very dear friendship with Durin. And I don't know. The elves in the original trilogy were so ethereal and kind of just otherworldly, angelic beings, that it's interesting to see this more not human take. Obviously, like they're still stand out amongst like the humans of the show, but a little bit more down to earth version of elves here that is more understandable. And I think Elrond, for me, is that most epitomized in the series.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think he's much warmer, and now maybe part of that is just all those years that go by, having that whole thing happen with Isildur, and maybe a lot of things, maybe the like one of the Rings of Power too, because I actually went back and looked at the Fellowship of the Ring, and Galadriel talked about to have to hold a ring is to like be alone, essentially. And I don't know, but here he's much warmer. His friendship with Durin is so lovely. Extremely heartwarming. Probably the greatest moments of levity too. But I just really enjoyed Elrond's character. And yeah, completely agree. Just more down to earth, both he and Galadriel in some ways, though she's still less like that than Elrond, but more humanized. So
Galadriel does feel a little bit more mythic in her quest and in her heroism. Elrond, he's not really fighting things or whatever, galloping on horses. He's kind of just going around talking to and like kind of more of this not Machiavellian, but more of the Game of Thrones kind of like conversations behind closed doors kind of vibe from Elrond here. So he's more of the conciliatory or whatever than he is like the actual boots on the ground soldier. Though I know from the Fellowship of the Ring, the first 5 minutes you see Elrond in battle, so that's coming. But yeah, right now the version we see him is he's just kind of again trying to strategize and make relationships and trying to figure out how to obviously navigate this threat that they're facing, and the relationships that he has that he holds dear.
Right. Right. You see Elrond in the battle, and the funny thing is, I don't recall seeing Galadriel in that battle, but that's, another. That's an interesting thing. We'll see if this series kind of touches upon anything like that, as far as like what might happen. But yeah. One of the things with Elrond, just how seriously he takes his his oaths and promises. Like, even though you talked about like the political kind of behind closed door stuff, he has a very I don't know. There's a certain. He definitely possesses kind of an idealism, almost maybe a naive idealism to some degree. But it's really, I found it touching. So
yeah, and I like that they are leaning into his half elfness, and kind of this. I mean, not to overlay too much, but a biracial identity almost. And that, I feel like that kind of gives him, it's implied that like gives him this unique perspective to be able to build bridges between different races, because he himself is kind of this, representation of holding two different sides of, this world. And so I feel like it makes a lot of sense that he's the one that can, curry favor with the dwarves when they and the elves famously always, are, there's always tension and always suspicion at best, between the two races. So I don't know. I really like that. And so I feel like it's again, not something that Tolkien probably had a good framework for 100 years ago, when he lived, but I think really does develop the story in a way that makes sense and overlay some of course, our modern lens into the Tolkien world, which again, I think, like I said at the beginning, people are complaining about it being woke and about there being multiracial representation on this show. And I just want to say I feel like that is if that's your gripe, again, you're never going to like the show, and that's fine. And people are like, oh, they're desecrating Tolkien. But Tolkien himself said that he created this world. His whole vision for creating Middle Earth and the languages was to create a world for people to explore and to create their own stories within. He says the novels are really just the window into the world. And the whole point kind of almost as this proto Dungeons and Dragons kind of landscape, he imagined there being the ability to tell many more stories within Middle Earth than what he was able to capture in just The Hobbit and the 3 books that he turned into Lord of the Rings. So I feel like the spirit of the Lord of the Rings was always to allow for these kinds of creative liberties, and of course JD and Patrick are trying to stay true to what they can, but there are a lot of gaps and there's things they have to change, just like this, this happens with anything. And adapting Game of Thrones, which had, George R.R. Martin's hand involved directly in that. They changed the ages, they changed the dates, they compressed timelines, all that stuff is happening, but it just wouldn't make sense as a TV show to not make some of those changes. So yeah, I really think that I feel like they're leaning into some of these more modern conversations, but they're not doing it in a way I think that takes away at all from the feeling of being in Middle Earth.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. To me, it didn't. It's not an overt. It's not. It's also not touched upon overtly. It's only, So it's not. I would agree. It doesn't. It didn't take away from the feel of it. To me. So
yeah. All right, let's move on to some of these other characters. So let's look at some of these new characters that are inventions for the show. So one kind of group that we haven't really touched on much at all are Nori, Poppy, all the Harfoots, and the arrival of the stranger. Now, there's a lot that we could touch on, but as I said, I feel like the thing that brought me to literal tears more than anything else on the show was the Harfoots. And of course, these are proto hobbits. This race will evolve into what we know to be the hobbits. You can hear that in even their names, like, Brandyfoot, reminiscent of Brandy Buck. Like they are, for all intents and purposes, the hobbits of this show. And I love Nori's interactions with the stranger, which is a Gandalf, is it not? I don't know, but it is, in a thematic sense, Gandalf, interacting with hobbits, yeah. So all that to say, what was some of your favorite stuff when it comes to the whole Harfoot storyline of the show?
I think what I enjoyed about it, I mean, of course you have, they feel again like retellings of, or reimaginings of Frodo and Sam in some ways, at least with Nori and Poppy, and just kind of this unlikely courage being found in the small and that kind of thing. So I enjoyed I enjoyed that, because in a lot of ways, going back to like our larger conversation about what Lord of the Rings is, I think part of it is these kind of archetypes and heroes and battles of good and evil, like reoccurring in different people over time and over again. So that was one thing, but it was also the way Nori it's just interesting to see someone who kind of almost doesn't fit in, because she longs for this kind of adventure, or to do something totally different from the rest of her people. And I kind of enjoyed seeing that process play out.
Yeah, and it does feel again reminiscent of maybe this Frodo and Bilbo spirit of, they're the ones who are willing to take an adventure. Now it's different than, I think, like the cultures of the Harfoots are very different than the culture of the hobbits, in that, like, the Harfoots are, they're these kind of prey animal instinct, kind of people who hide and camouflage when threats are there. Whereas the hobbits are kind of more, they're people who've grown up far away from conflict. And so they could just live in their grassy green mounds and not really have to worry too much about food, drink, and threats. They have, some encounters from, like the tall people like Gandalf, or the men, down the river. But like, for the most part, they're not people who know war and conflict. And so I like that we're exploring kind of, I think this, like, because they're a group of people who are constantly under the threat of, again, going off trail, as they say, but really just of being destroyed easily, because they're so small and they don't have numbers and they don't have much, but they have this really ingrained, codified culture of rituals. Like, I love that, like, even the memorial that they had for the people that they'd lost that year, like including Poppy's family, like those kinds of rituals that had been preserved and handed down on how they're going to make this journey to basically migrate, regularly. And all of it is to preserve their way of life, preserve the lives of the people there. Like, I get, like, it's not like I guess what I'm leading to is just saying that, like, I get that that Nori didn't fit in, which is totally understandable. But it's not like it was like this horrible culture of, like, oppression. But she's just, even in, I think that's a good, just like representation of what people can feel like today. It's not like, it's just that they don't fit the system. Doesn't even mean the system itself that they're in, their family or something, is like inherently bad or evil. It's just that, like, they don't feel like they fit into it. They can't be the way that they, want, that their parents want them to be, or whatever. And so I thought that was really, I don't know, just really complex and cool to examine.
Yeah, that's so well put. Yeah, because the system that they're kind of in, they do have to, they have to do those things to survive. And in some ways it's not without risk. Of course, they lose people like every time they travel, essentially, people being who fall behind and all of that. But yeah, I totally like it's cool to see that kind of to kind of relate to someone, because I think we can all relate to that a little bit, not fitting in within a certain system and kind of finding a different path, even while acknowledging that, or learning that the ways of, you know, the system we were raised in, or whether that be our family or a certain culture growing up, weren't like, isn't all bad or anything, or isn't, or could even be good in many ways.
Yeah, definitely. And I feel like that for me really came down to how they portrayed Sadik, the leader of them, and for him to kind of have this really compassionate, epic, like, you know, sacrificial death at the end there, where he was willing to go, quote unquote, off trail, you know, to protect and support Nori. And I thought that, you know, if they wanted to make like this, like, critique on this culture, this idea of culture being evil, the system being completely evil, then they would have made him the representation of that and be just completely ununderstanding. And yet, like, he was somebody who, even though he didn't quite agree with the change of philosophy, so to speak, like, he was willing to, like, still, you know, die for her. And so I just, yeah, I thought that was, I really love that. I love the song that they sang. You know, and I don't know, halfway through the season, whatever episode that was, the Wandering Day song, not all those who wander are lost, you know, which of course is probably the most famous quote from Lord of the Rings, even though I don't think it's in the movies. You know, it's just something that is transcended even just like having to be in be in some, like, you know, again, Hollywood blockbuster film. Like, that the idea of not all those who wander are lost is just, yeah, again, something that many people have tattooed on themselves, have in their Instagram bios. And I think I think a lot of people make fun of this kind of mentality, or this use of this phrase that a lot of people have. And I think in general, like, the spirit of it though is that, like, there are people who feel like they want to go off trail, and they, you know, and they live in a system where they can't.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, and what you said about Sadik, like it's kind of lovely that there's this, that Nori, and going off, she kind of brings that out of her people as well, a little bit. You know, they kind of push themselves, given their ties to her, and actually even their ties to the stranger, because he had become someone who had helped them become one of their own in some ways. I mean, helped them along the path. And I don't know, I don't know, that's just a really beautiful thing. It's what Lord of the Rings is about. I don't know, just all of
that. Yeah. Well, and so that phrase, not all those who wander are lost, comes from again, it's originally an excerpt from this poem that Gandalf writes to Frodo in a letter, because it's when Frodo's on his way to visit Aragorn. This is in the books version, and he gives him this poem that's supposed to help him identify who Aragorn is, who Strider is. He doesn't know Aragorn at that time, but who this guy Strider is going to be when he gets there. And you know, the poem it's pretty short, so I'll just read it here. But he says, "All that is gold is not glitter. Not all those who wander are lost. The old that is strong does not wither. Deep roots are not reached by the frost. From the ashes a fire shall be woken. A light from the shadows shall spring. Renewed shall be the blade that was broken. The crownless again shall be king." And so, I just want to say, love that the potential that if this is Gandalf, that, like, maybe this idea of not all those who wander are lost is not a Gandalf quote. It's really a Harfoot quote that he's internalized from his early days with them, and that's how he then thousands of years later is, you know, using to I don't know, it repurposes the quote to into this poem to then help Frodo along the way, a, you know, Harfoot-esque creature as well. But then I was thinking about it, like as I was listening to it, I was like, oh, there's a lot of stuff in this like poem that like reminds me of like the themes of this season of the show. Like again, the crownless again shall be king, you know, but it's kind of like the inverted version of that. Like it's Sauron who's going to be king, not Aragorn here, you know. Renewed shall be the blade that was broken. We had a broken blade that was renewed in this show. Again, kind of the dark inverse of it. Deep roots are not reached by the frost. Again, like the whole thing with Mithril being like the roots of this tree that, like, you know, experiences epic battle. There's just, I mean, I could go on. There's like a lot here of, from the ashes of fire shall be woken, right? Where we know that the dwarves in mining Mithril are going to like, you know, unearth the Balrog that will eventually be the undoing of Khazad Dûm and all of the dwarves there. Like, so I don't know if this, again, this is, I literally was just looking up this quote and saw this and I was like, oh, this feels like, I don't know, this is like some like thematic template they had for this season one, but it does feel like they, there's a lot of parallels here in this poem.
Yeah. Wow. I of course hadn't read the full poem, but when you put it like that, I can definitely see all that. That's really cool. Beautiful.
Yeah. I know JD and Patrick too, that they every day of their writing room when they were writing the show would put up a quote from the Lord of the Rings, just kind of as like a way to start the day with like a brainstorm. And it's also like the way to like, you know, because there are so many hope-filled quotes from Lord of the Rings as we've discussed, that they would like use that to like pump themselves up and be like, okay, like, you know, here's our inspirational quote for the day, but also something to like kind of, I don't know, worm into their mind, you know, as well as something that they could, you know, remember and maybe use for the show. So I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of potential for them to have like, I mean, again, there's not many more series or IPs or franchises out there that you could mine, you know, for like a lot of just depth and interconnected content like you could with the world of Lord of the Rings.
Yeah. So wait. So the creators are essentially, in a lot of ways, the characters are inspiring them to now write these characters. That's really cool.
Yeah, it's like a ring, you know, like a circle of power that goes through, and then you got to contain. Yeah, no, it's yeah, it's great. I genuinely feel like the people who made this show love Lord of the Rings, and I like, this is $1 billion TV show, which is just like crazy. Like there's never been anything like this. Like with Game of Thrones, like didn't spend this amount of money. Like this is a whole different level of money being spent on something. And so I'm just like, I was like very relieved that the people who wrote this loved these books. And I get that sense, like without question. In the interviews, they are like quoting Lord of the Rings every like third line. Like it is ingrained in them, all this content here. And so I don't know. I feel like we're in good hands. And if season one might not have been a 10 out of 10, I have hope. I trust to hope that season two, you know, could be even better here.
Yeah, I certainly have hope, and I wouldn't even call it meager. So
great. All right. Well, yeah, I think like one thing that we've touched on that I think really, you know, is at the heart of Lord of the Rings is fellowship, is friendship. And I know that this is something that the show has to get right. And I feel like it did, and it, for the most part, it really did well. And now there's not this big like fellowship of 9 that come together and form this super team in the same way as Lord of the Rings, but there are a lot of really deep, meaningful connections. And then, like I said before, among different types of people as well, which is central to the essence of Tolkienian friendship, is between the different groups of people who can come together to defeat the one evil that is monolithic and, you know, like that is again the same black darkness, but on the other side in the light, there's a lot of different colors, different races, different types of people. And so the ability for people to come together to solve the great problems of the world is, of course, the heart of the show. And so, we already talked about Elrond and Durin a little bit, but for me, I feel like that's top tier of like my favorite friendships of the series so far. Is that, I don't know, was that your favorite, or how do you feel about those two and their friendship of the show?
Yeah, I mean, it was, I mean, part of it is just, it's the most fun. I mean, Durin is just hilarious. I mean, but yeah, like that's probably top tier. Although I really found the one between Nori and the stranger touching, and just like, if not on par, like very close to it, in a lot of ways. But it was a different kind of enjoyment, I would say.
Nice. Yeah, definitely. And I think like the stranger and Nori was really interesting because of like I feel like Elrond and Durin are kind of they have the same power dynamic in that they're both these powerful beings from their people who are trying to like again navigate the world that they live in politically. And so it feels like more of this peer-to-peer friendship, whereas Nori with the stranger, he's somebody who comes in not knowing anything, but of course he has power and he's large. She's this small Harfoot. So there's an interesting, it's not the same. It's not this peer-to-peer relationship. They both have things to teach each other and to like ways that they can help each other. The stranger can protect her, as we see with his Hulk smashes. And we know that she's the one who's going to, have to help him along his journey to self-discovery. And, I love their dynamic because it does feel like they're very different, like very, very different in a way that Elrond and Durin don't feel. And then again, you have the Galadriel and Halbrand relationship, which is also extremely complex. I don't know if you would categorize that under fellowship necessarily. Maybe that's another one of the words for the Greek words for love you can use instead of philos, which is friendship. You could use, I don't know, eros, maybe. At the very least, like they have a different type of connection that we're used to seeing in Lord of the Rings, probably. But all that to say, I do think that like the Nori's friendship with the stranger, very beautiful, very touching. The way that they were able to figure out one, I know, inspiration that they had for that relationship was the Iron Giant. I don't know if you're familiar with that movie, but it's about they said, I mean, they're like, it's about a big gray guy who comes down to a kid and doesn't, know much about who he is or what he is. And even when he stands up and says, I am good, like, at the end of this last episode, he that was like taken from the Iron Giant. I think he says like, I am not a weapon, I think is like the line. So, very similar. They said it was very similar vibes in that like this person not only figures out who he is or is revealed to himself who he is, but chooses, who he is in that moment, which is kind of what they were alluding to with the Iron Giant reference.
Okay. Yeah. I had no idea, but
yeah. No, it's interesting. It's interesting. They're saying they're pulling from all different sources. They're talking about paintings, the raft like scene with, again, that we've referenced a few times with Halbrand and Galadriel was like the way that whole thing was shot was based off of a painting. I think it's called like the Raft of Medusa or something. It's a famous like Renaissance painting, I believe. Or I don't know if it's Renaissance, like something, but so they were like the school of Athens was how they were thinking of Numenor and so they were like really just trying to like pull in a lot of, I think, inspirational corners as well as from the deep minds of Middle Earth. But yeah, anyways, so I'm going off trail here, Bryan. But I do feel like at the heart, friendship, fellowship. Anything else stand out to you in that category, fellowship, on this show that you really want to touch on?
Well, I think so. I think we saw some other ones. I mean, I do think most core to Lord of the Rings is that kind of between different kinds of people groups kind of friendship. But we also saw other ones that I think were beautiful as well. Like, for example, between Isildur and his kind of ship comrades and him kind of ruining their, I mean, like their life, like what they had put it towards. They lost their kind of whole goal of, you know, being these what are they, sea guard, promoted to, they were looking to be permanent sea guards. Yeah,
I think the Sea Guard. Yeah,
I think so. But kind of that happening, and then finding a kind of redemption, and there being like forgiveness later on as kind of Isildur makes his you know, finds his way and you know, makes up to them. I mean, in his case, he lets one of them punch him, but you know, like I thought that was kind of beautiful as well, just seeing them kind of come back together.
Yeah, which is reminiscent of more of the like, let's say like the Frodo Sam relationship or something, with, like you're saying, it's not amongst people who are very different, but people who grow up together and know each other, which of course is like Nori and Poppy as well in that category, of just the deep friendship that can form with people who know each other so well, and know each other from the time they were, you know, very young, and would do anything for each other. And you know, I would say honestly, worst part of the whole show, worst part, hands down, is when Poppy says goodbye to Nori. They say goodbye. Nori's about to leave, and then Poppy runs back out for her again, and I was like, oh, she's going with them. She's going with them. And no, she doesn't. She just says goodbye a second time. I was like, that I know that they did that just to like trick us or like mess with our expectations. Like it was just like it was a Samwise run, like to go after, you know, with Frodo on the adventure. So I was really surprised that, like, yeah, they didn't do that, and it was heartbreaking. Again, may have shed a tear in that moment. And yeah, no, but I yeah, like I love what you're saying of just of like, there's all different types of fellowships, friendships explored in this show, which again just feels so Tolkien-esque, feels Tolkienian in how it's explored, especially in the original trilogy as well, and in the Peter Jackson films.
Right. Yeah, that's so funny. Yeah, such a disappointing moment from Proto Sam, but no, but I also we I mean, Galadriel and Elrond of that same kind of friendship vein of being in the same group, and just again having like a bit of a reconciliation towards the end there as well. So
yeah, absolutely. Okay, yeah, I mean, another interesting theme that I picked up on that, like, I feel like is really quintessential to Lord of the Rings, like, and again Tolkien's philosophy, which is that like leaders are healers. We haven't really touched much on the Bronwyn storyline and at all, and I think it is, for me, the weakest part of the series. It's the parts that drag the most for me. I don't really. There's a lot more mystery there, I think, as far as like what's going on. There's not a lot to for me to grasp onto of like, okay, I know who these people are. I know why they're. So I hope it hopefully can improve now that they're kind of more integrated into the main story. But one thing that I did really like was that, you know, even in the original trilogy and of the books, like they would talk about Aragorn's hands being like the hands of the kings were healing hands. And you know, when Frodo is injured, they rush him to Elrond, you know, in the Fellowship of the Ring, and Elrond is, you know, the leader there, and he's the one who physically has to heal Frodo, because only the leader is able to heal him. And I feel like, you know, with Bronwyn, they really established this similar theme and vibe that like to be a leader is to be a healer, and she's, you know, explicitly like her job or trade or whatever is to heal people, to be a healer there in the community. And then, you know, when calamity strikes and backs against the wall, it's her who steps up into that leadership position most naturally. And I think that is, again, a very Tolkien-esque like philosophy of who is the the most naturally gifted leader. It's the person who's most naturally gifted at healing.
Yeah. No, wait. How is that different from what Halbrand said about ruling being equivalent to bringing peace?
Yeah. Well, yeah, like you said, I mean, like the reluctant leader trope or whatever, like versus the ambition, like I don't know, the evils of industry and ambition is definitely present. And yeah, I think Sauron is not so interested in healing the world of Middle Earth.
Hey, that's not what he's saying. Those aren't the words coming out of his mouth. No,
Yeah.
but no, I think he used the words heal quite a bit.
I think he did. I think you're right. Yeah.
No, but I'm with you on that kind of theme being so integral to Lord of the Rings, and I agree that was maybe the strongest part of this, like, weakest aspect of this show, of just seeing her kind of heal and be in that position as a leader towards her people. Although I am kind of one interesting thing, I am kind of interested to see her son Theo kind of develop. I think that was one of the I didn't think that part was weak. I'm kind of interested in him as a character and kind of his struggle with missing kind of the power of the broken blade, and like feeling that sense of loss, and yet kind of still having this like good within him from his family, from Galadriel pouring into him. So I'm really interested to see where he goes. But anyway, that's a little bit of a branch, but
yeah, definitely. And we now have Secret Sauron off the board, but there's a lot still that we know we have to get to from where we're at in the story here to where we pick up, with everything that happens in the Fellowship of the Ring. And one thing that has to happen is there has to be 9 men who are corrupted into becoming ring wraiths. And so, I mean, even in the back of my mind, again, I was like, okay, is maybe Theo Sauron? Is maybe Halbrand Sauron? Like I'm the stranger, whatever. Like I'm like thinking these. Okay, well, maybe if they're not that, maybe they're gonna become like one of the 9 kings of men that are corrupted. And so, Theo, highest on my list as far as people who are potentially going to turn evil after literally being like, stained with evil on his arm there. So we'll see, but I don't know if there's any way he does not escape that kind of corrupt.
I still have hope for him, Josh. I mean, of the people we've seen, I agree. There's definitely potential, but there's still hope. There's still light within him yet.
Yeah. Witch King. Calling it now.
No.
Witch King. We'll see. There's nothing that I know of to suggest that that's actually him. Like no spoilers or like little moments or words. I just think like we've got to have met the Witch King by now, and who else but Theo, who's been marked. All right, Bryan.
Oh my gosh! If that happens, I don't know whether I'll be more shocked than when Did you have the same reaction as me at the beginning of episode 8 when everyone kind of bowed down before the stranger? Or the what are those people called?
Yeah, I've seen them. Yeah, I've seen them referred to as either the witches or the cultists. I think the cultists is what they're like actually like in the credits listed as. But anyway, I don't know. Whatever. The witches.
Right. Yeah, when I put subtitles on, I saw like the nomad, the ascetic.
Yeah,
and I was like,
yeah, they had specific names that were given to them in the 8th episode, I think. But
yeah,
I don't know.
All that to say, when they say we're here to serve you, Lord Sauron, I was like, whoa. Yeah. But
I was thinking
that's my reaction to you saying Theo will be the Witch King of it.
I was thinking those 3 witches are kind of like they're kind of like an inverted evil wise men from the Bible, in that they're following the stars, trying to chase this messianic figure, but really instead of the Christ, it's like the Antichrist. Instead of men, they're women, and they are when they find who they think is Sauron, realize it's not. Really, it is an Istar, a wizard. There are 5 Istar in Middle Earth that were sent to be protectors. Gandalf is one of them. Saruman is one of them. Radagast is one of them. And then there are 2 blue Istars, 2 blue wizards that are unnamed, that are not referenced in Lord of the Rings. But we do know that they are involved with the affairs of Rune in the East. So the fact that he does say like that's where he's going to head at the end of this might suggest that he's one of the blue wizards. I don't know. I mean, I feel like at this point, like he's got to be Gandalf. He's talking about like, the nose, like smell it, like using his nose. That part I was like that, like they're obviously like messing with us if it's not that. And I don't really.
He used the exact words. Always follow your nose.
Yeah.
Like that felt. I mean, maybe it was so on the nose that it's not. That it's not it. But unless he passed that on to Gandalf, but I was thinking it has to be now. I was reserving.
He turned those people into moths, there's some things here, that suggest it's Gandalf.
Yeah, but I'm really excited for that storyline. That's like one of the most tantalizing. That maybe it's because it feels so new, and like the wizards, the Istar, like so they're very mysterious, like not touched upon too much in the Lord of the Rings trilogy at least. So I'm like really, I'm just curious to see all that play out, and I can't wait, honestly.
No, I'm really excited too. And the writers did say, again, I was hearing another interview with them, and they were saying they really were not interested in a mystery box like approach of like, you could in a prequel series like kind of, I think, really try to play this game of like messing with expectations so much that you're like creating this whole kind of, I think they knew they could maybe create like online buzz if they really let this like who is Sauron thing get out of hand. But they just really said like we wanted to like really put you in the perspective of Galadriel when it comes to like who is Halbrand. And so like as confused as she is how confused we're supposed to be. And so I think that makes a lot of sense emotionally for us as a viewers. And so they're not like this, they're not just really like interested in like this mystery thing of like, teasing us as viewers, like until we're really like, there's thousands of theories online about who Halbrand is or who Sauron is or whatever. And I think that so that makes me think that it's likely that the stranger is Gandalf as well, because it does feel like they're showing these signs that he is at least going to become Gandalf, that we know. But I also do think it's kind of smart to, Gandalf is like such an important figure, and like to like Ian McKellen is like, just iconic as Gandalf. I mean, like one of like the all-time great performances in like film history. And so like to have someone step into those shoes immediately, I feel like it's almost smart to like kind of like have it be this other character, the stranger. So if it does turn into Gandalf, I feel like this is a really creative way to kind of give this actor, to give the story something new and fresh, like you're saying, versus just to I don't know, try to like force somebody into like, stepping into those big gray shoes when, I don't think anybody can fill them.
Yeah, I mean, it really is like a sacred role, sacred character. So like maybe building it up from something we haven't seen into that is like a way to ease us into kind of a transition from having a different actor play them. So
yeah. One of my favorite quotes here, switching gears to another person that we haven't touched on, but touching on the Numenorians a little bit. Mariel had this quote in the last episode that I loved so much in her conversation with Elendil, saying, "The way of the faithful is committing to pay the price, even if the cost cannot be known, and trusting that in the end it'll be worth it." And she's talking about, obviously for her losing her eyesight, like the sacrifice, he's feeling like he's so in this moment distraught about going on this adventure, losing his son, trying to do what's right, and at the end, like nothing going well for really either of them, and them coming back home with their tails tucked between their legs. I really just I don't know. As a person of faith, I found this like quote to be so compelling. When we're looking at Tolkien and looking at like all this evil versus good, how do you distinguish? You know, how do you choose the light? I think this is like really fundamental to like doing what's good in a world where it's often hard to do it, and it comes down to not taking these kinds of shortcuts to do good no matter what the cost. And it's easier said than done, but I thought that like was like so ingrained in cap. This is a quote from Tolkien elsewhere, but it just, I don't know, it was just so compelling to hear this conversation and to hear that like quote about like what like the way of the faithful is committing to do good even if it's not going to work out. Even if you don't know,
Right.
we're going to bring the ring to Mordor. I don't know what the plan is, but like it has to be done, you know, like, so we have to do it.
Right. Or we're going to like, or we're going to set out from the fortress at Hornsburg in the Two Towers when or at the Hornburg when Aragorn rode out in the darkness without Gandalf even having appeared yet. And even with you see that again, it's such a theme of this season too, when you see Nori and Poppy and Sadek go out to help the stranger when they were just they just saw how powerful the cultists were, and like they just set everything on fire. Like that was crazy. I was like, they're totally outmatched, and there's little plan other than just moving kind of. And sure enough, they played like an integral role in the stranger kind of overcoming them by whether it be throwing rock, just doing what they can with what, even with what little they have.
Yeah.
And like somehow, because like there is this kind of force of light or grace kind of at the foundation of the world, and Galadriel says there's a force other than darkness. You see, that's so crucial to the whole Lord of the Rings world, because there's that. You can set out, and that's what you can be kind of faithful to.
Yeah. I love that. And I just, again, it doesn't mean everything works out perfectly. Doesn't mean that there's no cost. Doesn't mean that, you know, to set out to do good means that good will be done. I think we're going to see a lot of good not be done in this show if we're going to end up in the place where we start, you know, Lord of the Rings at. But I do think that like that's what it means to be good, is to do those things even when it doesn't make sense, or even when it feels like, you know, you shouldn't. The common sense says you shouldn't. I mean, I think of the Boromir quote that is, you know, the famous meme of like, one does not simply walk into Mordor. Like logic says like that's not what you should do, but it's the only thing to do that you can is to walk into Mordor and try. And so I don't know. I felt like that, like it was such a random moment. I felt like, again, between these two characters that are not maybe the most essential of this show, but I found it so compelling in distilling down again this like good versus evil Tolkienian philosophy that just again instills in me so much hope watching these kinds of this show and the original trilogy, and why I feel like this show really like captured the spirit of the Lord of the Rings that I love so much.
Right. And it's not even just that. Yeah, like even in setting out, you might fall into certain things along the way, and there's still like a way to come back. Like you see that with Galadriel, even as she's kind of deals with her own struggles with the darkness or wanting vengeance. Like there's still like a greater kind of call to good, that even when you fail, there it could still be like somehow repurposed in the end. And like
yes,
even so I mean, maybe the moment of Lord of the Rings that encapsulates this the most is Frodo. You know, he's at, you know, ready to drop or goes up, and the ring is about to be brought into Mount Doom, and he ends up turning back and fighting with Gollum, and like no one actually decides to throw the ring in, but it's like somehow in fighting over it, this like the actual like the good wins out. But he had set out nonetheless, and even though maybe he had like a total failure morally in that moment, like it was still redeemed, and part of that was through friendship because Sam saved him from falling in as well. But it's like, I don't know, it's just it's wonderful.
Yeah, and I think they talked about this on again, the Ringerverse, a great podcast that goes into they do such a good job on that podcast, Mallory and Joanna, and they brought this one point that stuck with me about how in Lord of the Rings, like death is not the tragedy. In so many shows and whatever, like someone's downfall ends with their death, but in Lord of the Rings, like death is actually like sometimes most redeeming thing, most redeeming like ending for someone's arc. Like Boromir, it's in death that he can actually be redeemed and become good and like be fully himself. And I think like you see, yeah, and so I think that like the real tragedy is becoming evil and giving fully into the evil, versus like making like in Game of Thrones, like you see people like the real, I guess, like tragedies that happen is when somebody makes a bad political calculation and they die, and that's the downfall of that person. Versus in Lord of the Rings, it's really about the choosing of good and evil, and if they die, oftentimes that's because they chose good. And it's it's different. It's just a different kind of lens when watching a TV show.
Right. It's the battle within that matters more than the battle without, like going back to Galadriel's words. And you also see it with I think that was a major thing with King Theoden, of him overcoming his fear of death and choosing the moral good. So even though he loses his life, he emerges triumphant.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean there's a lot of other people we haven't touched on like too much, but is there anything else that you want to touch on before we're out of here? We're checking a lot of the boxes that I had of things that just I had to get off my chest here. We're going to do a podcast about this show, but is there anything else, Bryan, you want to anywhere else you want to go off trail here?
I think, well, I guess there was one more moment that I found I really liked in the show, which was that spoke to kind of this kind of force, this like kind of mysterious force of light kind of working in the background. And that was it reminded me of the Frodo and Gollum fighting over the ring and it working out. But just this moment where Isildur is like trying to stow away, and then the son of Pharazôn and Numenor is trying to burn this boat, and that happens, but they're fighting over it, and it burns the boat. But because that happens, Isildur kind of saves him, and then actually is able to go on to become part of the mission, even as a lowly like stable sweep. And as we know with Isildur, he becomes, I mean, there's a tragic element to his story, but nonetheless, he still becomes like a huge part of the overthrowing of Sauron. So I just found that like to be such a Lord of the Rings moment, really.
Yeah. That's I really like that, and I feel like again, we know where Isildur ends up. That's that part is very clear in the Fellowship of the Ring, but I do think, like you're saying, that he's hearing these whispers. Like there's this mythical, magical pull. I don't know exactly what's behind those whispers, but I do think that, like you're saying, there is this guiding hand, like that is, over all of Middle Earth. Whether that's the Iluvatar, the god figure of Middle Earth, or if that's just kind of this general concept of fate, destiny, that that seems to be at play in the world of Middle Earth. It's hard to know. Again, Tolkien kind of in a similar sense of our world, like leaves things up to more interpretation, and people debate these things of how they how to interpret these kinds of events in our world and in theirs. But I think it is interesting. We haven't touched on Isildur too much, but I do find him really interesting. He wasn't super compelling as this person that I was like rooting for, at every turn. But I found him to be very sympathetic at the same time as somebody who, I don't know, is kind of as like a moody teenager, like wants to like do what he wants to do, and his dad won't let him, and he still wants to do it anyways and finds another path. But I don't know. I feel like we're gonna see a lot more Isildur, even though he's dead apparently. I seriously doubt that. But that's where we left off. I was surprised we didn't see him kind of rising from the ashes or anything, but I guess they probably just trust that we heard Isildur's heir enough in the original trilogy to know that, that he has to produce some offspring before this thing is done. So anyways, anything else, Bryan, you want to touch on before we're out here?
Oh yeah. I mean, with Isildur, I agree. He wasn't this hero you were rooting for, like when you saw Aragorn every time he came on the screen. But he was very relatable. Like he has this kind of heartfelt dream, and he makes a lot of mistakes. He comes back, and I don't know. You can see him like he's really trying. He doesn't have this like I don't know. He's not so like darkened or anything, and while his story may ultimately end in tragedy in the Lord of the Rings sense with that failure, it's still like I'm enjoying his story so far, and I think like his whole story will be very I think it has potential to be very moving and one of the more compelling parts of the whole series.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to see him across the whole series. That's for sure. Okay. Well, I think that's about it. Going to wrap things up here. It just, again, any hot takes, any predictions, any last thoughts on this series before we wrap things up here?
Let me want to see if I left anything. I'm looking over my notes real quick. Let's see. Oh, one other huge, this isn't a hot take, but one other thing I just really found cool was that I liked this this link of you see this kind of this theme of like binding of the light and the dark and the mithril in and even in kind of what you have with Gandalf and or the stranger, if it's not Gandalf, and kind of Sauron. I don't know if they're arriving at the same time, but if the cultists were mistaking him for Sauron, then they must have had some kind of prophecy that that he would come through a falling or something. I don't know exactly how that's going to work out. Very interesting. Or like what exactly the story is, whether Adar really did kill him and he wasn't totally dead and came back or something. But regardless, there's this kind of parallels of the light and darkness being bound together, coming at the same time, and that kind of balance that's really interesting. And then even conversations between Galadriel and Halbrand about Halbrand wanted to be bound, but just then talking about that.
Definitely. I mean, that's interesting to point that out. I think especially in the mithril being kind of the most quintessential like representation of that, of like it's literally a product of evil and good being at war with each other and creating so much like energy there that it creates this whole new element. And so I think, I don't know, I think that like the duality of good versus evil is, again, quintessential Lord of the Rings, gonna be explored throughout the series. And I do think there's probably this like dilemma, again, philosophically, of does evil being bound to good like does the good overcome the evil? Does the evil overcome the good? Does it create something new between the two? You know, can power and ambition ever be matched with like good intentions and pure intentions and goodness of heart? You know, can you actually rule and serve, you know, or rule and have people serve you and do good at the same time? Like, you know, those are some of those things that are, I don't know, tempting, seducing to think about, especially, I don't know, you know, you think about the phrase power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And I feel like, you know, they're going to explore this idea of what it means to rule, what it means to have power over others. And I don't know, how does goodness find its way in that, or can it? I don't know. So, yeah, we're definitely gonna, I don't know, we're definitely gonna see a lot of these good versus evil tensions and questions explored.
Right, and even just with the rings of power themselves, and how, I mean, you see Galadriel kind of call an audible, going to 3 instead of 2, talking about 2 as division. It'll be very interesting to see that kind of play out, if that throws a wrench in you know, Sauron's plans to some degree at all. But
yeah, definitely. All right, well, thank you, Bryan, for joining us here on Fantasy Shmantasy. And I think, you know, behind the name Fantasy Shmantasy, I think this is all fantasy, people. If you're taking it too seriously, getting upset because the orcs or because the elves don't look like you think they should, take a break, take a step back. If you're upset because, you know, you feel like, you know, dwarven women need to have beards in order for you to enjoy your Lord of the Rings, remember, this is fantasy schmantasy, people. Like, this is supposed to be fun and for, you know, all types of people to enjoy different aspects of it. So yeah, I want to encourage anybody who, you know, I don't think anybody's listening in an hour and a half into a podcast about this show if they really didn't like it that much. But if you are here, okay, let's just, you know, take a step back before we're sending that tweet, you know, calling this TV show too woke to enjoy. That is my parting words to you all. Bryan, anything else you want to leave on the table here before you head off and on your own adventure there?
No, I think just to say, hope is never mere, even when meager.
So. Love it. All right. Well, thank you all. You can catch me at Silent Podcasts, as well as podcasting about Survivor, anchor.fm/Fupasu. That's FUPASU. Yeah, we talk about reality shows, fantasy shows, and everything in between here at Silent Podcast, where we are anything but silent. So thank you all very much. See you back in a year, 2 years. I don't know. Whenever they do season 2. All right.